Welcome back to the show, everyone. I am really excited for this next guest because many of us have not heard from him publicly in a while. He has not done any podcast appearances. And so I'm very grateful that he chose mine to return to. Greg Foss, the one and only Mr. Do the Math. How are you, sir?
Well, it's so nice to see you, Nat. I have had a pretty volatile year. Uh, Involved some business shortfalls, but just you go through life and you never know where the next curveball is going to come from. And this one caught me out of left field a little bit, but the Bitcoin community has been wonderful. Support from people like yourself and Jeff Booth. Good friends who I met through the Bitcoin community that were continuously reaching out have given me a base of friendship that I otherwise wouldn't have. My old time friends in both countries from school or whatnot, they're always there, but the Bitcoin community was special. So I went through a cycle that I don't know if you remember or any of the listeners remember. I have admitted on stage at the Bitcoin conference, I think it was 2022, but it might have
Mhm.
been the year before. I admitted that I have struggled with anxiety and depression in my career.
Yeah. You talked
And
about it on the original show that we did as well.
oh, I did, eh? Okay, so what ends up happening is this bout, I did have to get hospitalized, which is pretty scary because I'd never been hospitalized before. But what they did end up diagnosing me with is not just anxiety and depression, but something called bipolar, which means I'm manic. And no one ever goes to the hospital when you're feeling too good. You're pumped, you're full of energy, you're feeling good. Um, but the manic phases can be as dangerous as the depression phases. You can make irrational decisions. You can think that you walk on water. And I can look back at some of my podcasts or some of my spaces, and I'm saying this with a smile for people that, because I'm not proud of it, but I look back at that Ordinals event, for example, in my career. That's a big embarrassment. My response to the Ordinals after the 2023 Bitcoin conference. I ended up apologizing. I called David Bailey personally and we talked, and it was clear that I was in a bit of a manic phase, thinking I was better than anybody, but also experiencing the pressures of the business that ended up costing me a ton of capital. Long story short, um, I want to again set the record straight. I was wrong. My delivery was unprofessional. My message, perhaps, was okay, which was I wish that the Ordinals guys weren't on right after a presidential candidate pitching for Bitcoin, but we'll leave that alone. But I'm happy that guys like Dylan LeClaire and David Bailey from Bitcoin Magazine have actually reached out to me, encouraging me in this next phase of my career and actually offering up some suggestions as to what I might be able to do to continue to interact with the Bitcoin community and actually enable myself to provide for my family. So, I don't own as much Bitcoin as I once did. I was valuing in my mind my investment in a power company as a Bitcoin proxy when I shouldn't have been. But I'm open to questions. Otherwise, we'll move to the topic of the day, which I think you wanted to talk about more than anything is the macro. But I want to take this opportunity just to say on air, congratulate you and Sam, which I think most people know. You're getting married in, less than a month. And I couldn't be happier for both of you. You guys are wonderful for the Bitcoin community. You're good people. You'll make a great family. And I look forward to you guys being lifelong friends. I wish you guys all the best. It's a journey that is so amazing when you meet your soulmate.
Coin Stories is proudly brought to you by Bitdeer, a global leader in disruptive technology for Bitcoin mining and AI. As a publicly traded leader, Bitdeer boasts a massive 900 megawatts of operational data center capacity and an additional 1.1 gigawatts under development across 3 continents, positioning Bitdeer as one of the most diversified and power-dense computing companies in the world. Bitdeer's leadership laid the groundwork for the original advancements in Bitcoin mining ASICs. It's really the only company in the industry with the track record and clout to disrupt the market again with groundbreaking new designs for the next generation of mining ASICs. Now, Bitdeer is leveraging years of expertise in data center and cloud management into high-performance computing through a recently announced partnership with NVIDIA. Join Bitdeer in reshaping the world of Bitcoin mining. Learn more at bitdeer.com and explore how they are pioneering the future today. Well, first of all, Greg, thank you so much for your kind words. I'm very grateful to be friends with you. And we've had some conversations off the video, off the record. And I just want to say how much I respect and admire your vulnerability, your candor. I know that you are someone who has always been so committed to your family, to your children, to doing the right thing. And you've been so committed to this space, to the overall mission of helping people understand Bitcoin so that they can reach on to this life raft and help themselves. And so I think I speak for many in the Bitcoin space when I just say thank you for your work. And it really takes a lot to be able to admit when you're wrong. I wish that maybe you should coach some of the politicians and leaders we have out there, because so many people don't have the ability to actually come forward and say, you know what, I was wrong about something. But I don't want to, it's a very delicate subject, so I don't want to press too much. That's not what this show is about. It's really about furthering the Bitcoin message. So just share maybe the lesson that you've taken away, because I know that over the past year, there's been quite a toll that's been taken on your family. And speaking from someone who has seen my parents lose a lot during the great financial crisis, I know what it's like when all of a sudden you sort of hit a wall and you don't know what to do and you're struggling financially in a way that you didn't expect. So maybe there's someone out there that can relate to this. So maybe some lessons learned that you wanna share.
Well, to be frank, the lesson that it's continuous learning. I brag. I don't brag. The fact is, I've sat in a risk chair for 35 years as a career. This last error, you wouldn't imagine it could happen at this point in your career, but looking back at it, it's pretty. In my evaluation, it's pretty simple to see how it happened. Ultimately, I trusted rather than verify. I'm a trusting person. And a handshake means as much to me as a signed contract. Suffice to say, I wish I had just put all my money in Bitcoin. I started investing in Bitcoin under $1,000, and I did fund some startups that were successful exits, but I still would have been better off staying in pure Bitcoin. Don't try and outsmart yourself. Was I trying to buy a job or trying to buy an affiliation? Potentially. More importantly, though, you got to realize that you're human, and humans make errors. I'm trying to own this. It certainly is a painful error. I still luckily I still have my great family, although their patience with me is wearing thin. I would just say to people out there, trust but verify. Understand that there's very few things that you can predict with 100% certainty. I would like to, if I was able to do it over again, I would have potentially fallen for the same, or not fallen, but I didn't properly size my investment. So always size your investment properly according to your risk. But most importantly, not everybody is a Jeff Booth.
Mm,
Not everybody's a Preston Pish, James Lavish, people who they're just such good, solid people who are working for the benefit of the Bitcoin community and sacrificing potentially things for their own. There's many more multiples of people out there that are actually just looking out for themselves.
mm,
So my best advice is you're not I'm 61 years old. I'm twice the age of most people in the Bitcoin community, at least. Um, you just have continual learning. And then the final thing I'll say, which is probably the most important, there's nothing more important than your word or your bond.
mm.
And I have always, in my opinion, always acted on that basis, but not everybody will. So
Right.
you have a family. You mentioned your dad, and you mentioned to me offline your dad's name may have been Greg as well. So
Mm,
um,
yes.
I would just say to that other Greg and to myself, and I'm trying to get over this setback. I know how difficult it is, but let's move. Let's move to the next level. I will say I'm just looking at some notes that I have over here. Um, I will say once again what a great community the Bitcoin community is, and we've been through a lot in a very short period of time. I expect
Mhm.
this future to be the same. A lot of unknowns, a lot of curveballs, but I have met people in the Bitcoin community. The outpouring of support that I've received when I pulled my pants down and basically told the world that, you know, I've lost my Bitcoin stack, the equivalent of my Bitcoin stack. I need to find a job. You should see some of the people that have reached out and said, you know, Foss, this is an idea. I've had at least 5, I would quote, as interviews of things that I can do. And that is encouraging. But on the other hand, I always thought of myself as I would just as just as soon have been on the beach at 61 years old. I sort of envisaged that as being my retirement plan. Anyway, I gotta build back. I do appreciate the support from the Bitcoin community, and I know I might sound like a woe is me, woe is me. It is a tough disease. I will sympathize with the bipolar people in the world. There's a significant percentage in the United States, millions of people. It's a very tough disease, and sometimes you get over your skis and then you let that disease let you say stupid things or reach out and say to Udi, for example, whatever happened there. Hopefully, it's water under the bridge. I want to work for the future for the kids, and yeah, let's talk about that future and what we see as the potential outcomes for the current environment.
Well, I'm sure that you're helping countless people. And I know that so many people's prayers are with you. We're sending you a big hug. So again, thank you so much. And a lot of nuggets of just great wisdom there. So let's talk a little bit about Bitcoin. It's been, again, about a year since you've done a show like this. So you've had some time to give your conviction some thought. What do you think about where we're at with Bitcoin? I know a lot of people were so excited when the ETFs were approved. They thought maybe we'd be in the 6-figure range, but we just seem to be chopping along. We have a very volatile macro backdrop. So, what's your take?
Well, let's start with some of the over the last year, some of the progress that's been made. You can talk about the ETFs, but they were inevitable. They started in Canada a couple of years earlier than it was in the United States. So it's hard to believe that Canada was a leader in the ETF space, the Bitcoin ETF space, but yeah, we were. We expected it to come to the US. What's really important is what the research that BlackRock's putting out right now on Bitcoin and grasping some of the nuggets that the Bitcoin community has been using for literally 8 years. The concept of digital gold. Pretty simple, but You know, it's when BlackRock says it, it has a little bit more penetration within the community. They say it's a non-correlated asset, a risk-off asset. Now, I don't believe that it'll trade as a risk-off asset in the next downturn, and I believe that it will probably still be correlated. There'll be hedge funds that will short Bitcoin to hedge their equity exposure or other TradFi asset exposure. But in my opinion, they shouldn't be, because I think of Bitcoin as a risk-off asset, as a form of insurance. Mm-hmm. Joe Colasare will tell me I'm wrong until the cows come home, and that's fine. He doesn't have to believe that it's a form of insurance. But as you know, I valued Bitcoin using credit default swaps on sovereign debt, and was able to come up with a valuation of Bitcoin based on the debt metrics, the market that I had grown up with for 30 years, the debt markets. And everybody should know that the debt markets are far more important than the equity markets. They tend to get things and sniff things out earlier. Mm-hmm. So it's amazing what BlackRock is saying. There was the headline that I won't be able to say it verbatim, but they basically said BlackRock suggests owning Bitcoin as a hedge to the $35 trillion of debt, of U.S. debt, in case that shouldn't mature or roll over. And we've been saying that the whole time, right? Like, it's the debt spiral, the mathematics, do the math. It's so simple when you see the metrics of the fiscal situation in the U.S., but also in every other G7 nation in the world, as well as all the other 200 countries that aren't in the top economies. Everybody runs the same playbook. So BlackRock saying it is extremely important. Did the price get to where we want? It's still a rounding error. You can't look at what the next $10,000 fiat dollar move in Bitcoin is. Look out 5 years, and I believe that you'll be talking about, instead of $10,000 moves per day, or not per day, but cyclical, you'll be talking about $100,000 moves in Bitcoin. What is the next $100,000 move? So that's so important, that you get an established player, world's largest fund manager, and Larry Fink on CNBC telling Jim Cramer, I was wrong. It's possible to be wrong. And then you change your view. So just looking at my notes here, I want to make sure that I say what else has happened. Well, BlackRock has come around. But you know what's cool, Nat? Is that Jim Bianco came around as a Bitcoin investor. Mm-hmm. I believe, because he was on your show. Now, I don't want to put words into his mouth, but I think you told me, yes, he believes in Bitcoin now. Well, a year ago, I'm pretty certain he did not believe in Bitcoin.
Well, I mean, he's always been interested also in all the other cryptocurrencies, but I think he's been a Bitcoiner for a while. He does see it getting eventually to $1 million. He thinks more development work and more applications need to be emerging in the space. But yeah, it seems like more and more people are bullish on Bitcoin. Okay, so the cool thing is, Jim Bianco came on my Canadian trading floor over 30 years ago. That's how long he's been in the business. And I was a trader at a firm that is now Merrill Lynch Canada. But he came on the floor, the trading floor, and I remember saying, wow, this is pretty awesome to have a Wall Street guru like Jim Bianco visiting a trading floor in Canada. And I'm pleased to see that. I know he took the .eth out of his but I'm pleased to see that, because there was definitely a time when he was not a Bitcoin fan, and I remember thinking, that's too bad. Shall I take him on in arguments? And I never did. I pretty well took everyone else on, but it's good to see Jim Bianco. So these are the positives. You get, when is Andrew Ross Sorkin going to become a Bitcoin believer on CNBC? I don't know.
And maybe he never will. And you always need people that aren't, you know, you can't have everyone
Yeah.
on one side of the market. You always need buyers and sellers. You always need believers and non-believers. And by the way, you always need people that are taking short positions in the market, because sometimes when the shorts are right, the only buyer is the short coverer who is in there bidding for XYZ asset because they're short it and they need to close out their position. All the long guys are, God, I'm not touching any more of this. I own too much. I was wrong. I want to get out. Well, luckily the bid is a short covering bid. So shorts are necessary. Not everyone can be on the same side of the trade. You need the interaction between buyers and sellers. But that's what's happened in the last year. Economically, this is what we need to talk about. What has changed economically, and what are some of the warning signals? So, if you want to get into that, I'd be happy to
I
talk
do.
about to
Yeah.
talk about some of those. So,
Yeah, so I mean, you bring up a great point because so many legendary investors have now recognized Bitcoin as a legitimate asset. We've seen progress, pension funds adding Bitcoin, some of these big TradFi names suddenly converted. But it's really interesting when you zoom out and just look at the picture of the economy. And I'm shocked that more people are not looking at this as an alternative and as a solution to broken money, because right now it seems like we are just on this unsustainable path of continually adding debt, and fiscal spending has just increased beyond so many people's expectations. And I when I heard the I watched financial media after the Fed rate cut, and everyone says that Jerome Powell was able to engineer that soft landing, and everyone's sort of impressed with him. So I wanted to get your take because I feel like you'll have a more truthful point of view.
okay, well, first of all, you always look at the 2-year bond as directional for an administered rate like Fed funds. Okay, so the difference in yields between the 2-year bond and the Fed funds rate, which was 5.25 to 5.5 before they cut, now 50 basis points lower. There's still a huge gap between the administered rate of Fed funds and the current 2-year rate. Okay, there's about 100 and the last time I looked, 160 basis points, 1.6%, which means there's a whole lot more room for Jerome to go to catch up to where the market says he should be. That's the market. That trades on a daily basis. He sets policy monthly and sometimes not for 60 days. So it's also where the dot plot is going. So yes, he cut by 50 basis points, and everyone said, oh my God, he must be panicking. I was joking, and I'm not sure if you ever saw this. Wouldn't it have been great if he came out and cut by 3/8? Everyone said it had to be 25 basis points or 50 basis points. Hey, there's a pretty cool decimal in there called 37.5 basis points or 3/8. You could have really shown the market who's in control if you had only cut 3/8, right? That would have been epic. He didn't do it. Should he have gone 50 basis points? I believe he should have, only because of where the 2-year note is trading versus where the current administered rate is. But let me go a little further. They definitely see some weakness in the economy. Okay,
Mm-hmm.
the beige book, what they see in the beige book that's not published, they have a first look at that. I have some anecdotal evidence. I was vacationing in Maine for our regular summer vacation. This was the lightest traffic that I've seen coming into New England over the Labor Day weekend that I've seen in the last decade. Okay, people not traveling, the restaurants were not nearly as full. Oh, we have a 90-day wait to get a table. Oh, okay, but you can come in tonight if you really want to. You know, this sort of
Yeah.
baloney that's happening. So they should have cut on a strength of the perceived strength of the economy, not just American economy.
Mm-hmm.
Have they noticed what's happening in China and
Mm-hmm.
understanding that China led global growth for the last decade? And China now has 90 million empty condominiums
Mm-hmm.
in a country whose birth rate is declining. So that who's going to live in those?
Yeah.
The China stock market's getting shredded. The real estate prices, Evergrande,
Yeah.
fallout. No one's talking about that. So does the U.S. set policy for the whole world? I'm afraid they do. So what do we have to worry most about? Stagflation. This will
Mm-hmm.
be something that I think we really have to look at. And Mark Moss mentioned this on your podcast as well. He's worried about the inflation component of not holding rates high enough to snuff out inflation. So I think there'll be stagflation. Jamie Dimon thinks has similar thoughts. I think Jerome Powell, the jury's out as to whether he'll be the greatest Fed president or
Chairman.
chairman, Fed chairman. But in the short term, he's engineered a landing, and it has not been a crash landing. So I applaud him for that, but it's far too soon, in my opinion, to say that it's been a success.
Mm-hmm.
And it's because of things like China, because of the potential for stagflation, because of anecdotal evidence like restaurant index, the U.S. restaurant index, and the lower end of the consumer credit concerns with the low end consumer. All of these things are flags for me that I'll be looking for.
It's time for a quick break to hear these messages from my partners who make this podcast possible. First up, Casa. It is so easy to set up your Bitcoin 3-key self-custody with Casa that I can show you pretty much the whole process in just 30 seconds. You're watching it right now. I recently switched to Casa for multi-sig collaborative custody and inheritance planning because of their enhanced non-KYC required privacy and the ease of this mobile app. Make sure to watch the tutorials and get your Casa plan for 10% off at casa.io/Natalie. Next up, Speed Bitcoin Lightning Wallet, one of the fastest growing wallets out there. Speed is a secure, low-cost way to send or receive Bitcoin instantly. It's super simple and scores high user ratings. You can even use it to shop gift cards of your favorite brands and earn rewards. Download Speed using the QR code on the screen or the link in my show notes and use promo code COINSTORIES10 to get 5,000 free sats. And finally, the why of Bitcoin is easy to grasp, but the how can be so confusing. The Bitcoin Way is a professional Bitcoin IT and security team offering personalized one-on-one support that guides you through cold storage, setting up nodes, inheritance planning, privacy best practices, and more. Don't take my word for it. Take 82-year-old customer Bill's.
Give the Bitcoin Way a try. You will be well on your way to owning and protecting the greatest money ever discovered.
Set up your 30-minute free consultation today. All right, back to the show. Right. There are so many cracks under the surface. And it's interesting because we rewind, and obviously Jerome Powell said that inflation would be transitory. They were wrong on that. And then I think I saw a cover of Barron's this year in January or February, maybe, where Jerome Powell was stating that there will be absolutely no rate cuts in 2024. And here we are, we're expecting, I think, another potentially another 75 basis points before the end of the year. But you mentioned Mark Moss's interview, and I kind of want to touch on something because I've heard different stories from different analysts. Some people are expecting this massive crash to happen where kind of like the panic we saw with the Japanese yen carry trade, all of a sudden risk off, everyone's selling and Bitcoin tanks and everything else tanks along with it. And others are saying, no, we potentially could have a melt up, or we're going to have a crash up. Things are going to grind higher. And I want to separate out CPI from asset inflation because I think that's really important. Over the last 2 decades, we've seen tremendous amounts of asset inflation that didn't necessarily manifest in everyday CPI. But since the pandemic, we have seen it in everyday things like grocery prices and gas and rent and all of that. So how do you see this actually playing out when we look at the data that you just discussed? How will this play out for people that are trying to plan for the next couple years or 5, 10 years?
I have no idea. And I think people have to be honest that nobody knows the playbook for sure. You have the bulls and you have the bears, which you'll always have.
Yeah.
You generally have optimists in the stock markets. Stock market investing requires optimism. And I always say the credit markets are for the pessimists. So look to what the credit markets are telling you. Don't look at the stock markets. Look at the credit markets. And currently, the credit markets are under control. There's no flashing red signal in high yield bonds, nothing in investment grade debt. There's a little bit of stress in the short end in what used to be called the TED spread, which is now the secured overnight funding rate versus, so that's bank lending versus T-bills. You can look at those stresses. None of them are flashing red, which is a great sign, because in 2008, when the equity market was melting up, the credit markets were saying, you got a huge problem here with subprime mortgages. So the two markets disconnected. Right now, you're not having a disconnect. You still have the credit markets, which are in control. I'll be sure to let people know when the credit markets start getting unsettled. That's usually a precursor for for the equity markets to be used as a punching bag. Because don't forget, credit is always or equity is a subordinate claim to credit in any capital structure. I'd love to talk about Michael Saylor using that ability right there if we have time on the podcast. If not, we can talk about that later, but I'll leave you with this thought. Credit tends to be an early warning system for the equity market. So right now, no one's whistling past the graveyard, but no one in credit is quite as concerned as some of these bears that say everything's going to crash. Could it happen? Yeah, absolutely, it could happen. It could be a tail event, tail risk that nobody saw it coming. But that's why I have to say, I have no idea. All I try and do is smooth out the short term and look in the long term. And in 4 years, at the next Bitcoin halving, I'm very confident, not certain, but very confident that the price will be substantially higher than it is now, measured in fiat dollars. And why is that? Well, it could be because I just got a text message, someone saying, love you, man. So the world is a great place, okay? What was my thought process? Oh, yeah. So it could, Bitcoin as measured in fiat dollars could be a lot higher for two reasons. One, because of the debt spiral that James Lavish has done a great job of pointing out. Preston Pish had a guest on his recent pod measuring M1, the monetary base, M1, M2. In all the M's, the fiat currency will debase with 100% certainty, okay? Because they need to print money to buy the debt. That is the simplest trade I've ever seen. So as measured in fiat, Bitcoin can get higher price in Bitcoin just because the value of the fiat debases, right? Otherwise, why could Bitcoin go higher? In isolation, because you have banks that are going to custody Bitcoin. You have the corporations like MicroStrategy that are going to put Bitcoin on their balance sheet, and you're only getting 450 Bitcoin produced per day. And if all of a sudden the demand side of the equation is 900 Bitcoin a day, where does the price go? So pretty bullish outlook. But as Jeff Booth says, we need to start using Bitcoin as a medium of exchange to make it the velocity of Bitcoin a reality. So on that note, I have another thing I'd love to talk about, which is PubKey and the Donald Trump transaction for cheeseburgers in
Oh yeah.
New York City.
Yeah, no,
Um,
that was really exciting to see, and we missed you at this year's Bitcoin conference, but it was amazing to see two presidential candidates talking about Bitcoin, embracing it, talking about potentially a U.S. strategic reserve or stockpile, and so many people really hope that with this next election it will usher in a more favorable administration. I don't know. I mean, some people are saying that if one person gets into office versus another, it's going to be very difficult, a lot of headwinds for Bitcoin to move higher, but I guess we'll see. What's your take? And were you there at PubKey when he was making that transaction?
wouldn't it have been wonderful? No, I'm barely able to get out of the house with my recovery. I say that tongue in cheek, but the truth is, I went down to the center of town of Toronto for the first time in a couple of months, just this week, to meet a potential job partner. What will I say? All paths lead to Bitcoin. Some paths lead to Bitcoin adoption sooner than others.
Right.
Assuming there's no crack in the code and the monetary velocity of Bitcoin is able to prove that it's a substitute, it's not just a store of value, but it's also a medium of exchange. I wasn't able to get to PubKey, but Thomas interviewed me in a school bus at Bitcoin 2023. And I mentioned to him that I'm a partner in 10 Irish pubs in Montreal. And we've been trying for the longest time to get Bitcoin to become a regular, a regular attraction, a
Payment
point
method?
for, yeah, just even getting Bitcoin Montreal groups to meet regularly at our pubs would be a wonderful thing. And we just haven't, it's hard for me to get the management of the pubs in Montreal. I'm in Toronto, so 300 miles away. But I speak to my founding partner all the time. I just spoke to him today. Wouldn't it have been amazing if we already were set up to accept the prime minister candidate in Canada to do a transaction at our pubs? We're set up for it, but nothing like PubKey. So my hat comes off. Take my hat off to Thomas and what you've done at PubKey. The fact that you got a president in there.
Yeah.
The fact that someone corrected him. It wasn't a crypto transaction. It was a Bitcoin transaction.
Yeah.
You have guts when you can correct a presidential candidate that it's Bitcoin, not crypto. I joked with Thomas on a Twitter reply. I would love to have collaboration between our pubs in Canada and his New York City pub. And who knows where that will lead in the future. But I'm not going to predict who's going to win the presidential election in the U.S. I have a desire for someone to win over the other candidate, but I'm not going to say who that is. I have to focus on Bitcoin. Just as far as keeping my mental sanity and my focus going forward to try and recover some of my opportunity cost loss. But hey, the USA is still the greatest country in the world. Okay, please, people, never forget that. And if the USA implodes, as a Canadian, I'm going to be extremely disappointed. In fact, I will predict that if the USA implodes, Canada has imploded a decade before before the USA implodes. And it pains me to see people who don't appreciate how great a country the United States is. For even a guy like Elon Musk protecting free speech and having a constitution. So as a Canadian, and I often joke, living rent-free in your attic, okay? So I'm a Canadian living rent-free in the attic of the United States. You guys don't even know where we are, okay? Half of America couldn't find Canada on a map if I asked them to find Canada. And then I'm going to throw out a little tidbit. Well, it's it's sort of true, because I did go to school down there, and outside of my Ivy League buddies, there were a lot of people that said, well, I didn't realize that our president isn't actually your president as well. I swear that was what someone said.
Oh no.
But here's what I'm going to say. Did you know that 90% of the Canadian population lives within 100 miles of the U.S. border?
I have heard that. Yeah.
Which is
you have
to
a lot
say,
of remote to the north. Yeah.
if you just took the U.S. border and shifted it north by 100 miles, you would gain another 30 million population. Not that you'd want us necessarily. I mean, we have some baggage up here, but Canada's a pretty darn good country as well. Canada's a rounding error, and it really is what happens in the United States is most important for global capitalism, global security. No one's, I don't want to bring up a controversial subject, but my roommate from Cornell, I went to school at Cornell. My roommate was killed on 9/11. He worked for Cantor Fitzgerald, and so did his brother.
Right.
And I just try and look at the positives, which is the US of A. Okay, you guys were founded on founding principles. I think that the founding fathers were incredibly smart. Whoever knew they would have the foresight to be able to impeach a president on some of the grounds that some presidents have been impeached, but they saw that a couple of 100 years ago. So Nat, there's a lot of Bitcoiners out there that want the US to fail. And I'm a Bitcoiner that doesn't want the US to fail. I want to be able to develop a parallel system called Bitcoin, which will actually make the US able to maintain its global lead as global leader for freedom of speech, global leader for protecting the rights of the population, and then also global leader from a monetary perspective. Imagine if the USA does use Bitcoin as a reserve asset. And imagine if the US starts pricing energy in Bitcoin.
Right.
All of this would be so positive.
Yeah, I hope that is the future. I hope for a return to some of our founding values and the ability to revive the American dream. And, I have to say, I love every Canadian Bitcoiner I've met. I don't know what's going on up there with the politics. Would love to someday host Pierre Poilievre on my podcast. Maybe he could stop by one of your pubs. But before we wrap up, because I know we don't have much time left, I do want to go back to something you said, which is that there are no flashing lights in the credit market. Can you help me better understand why not? Because I feel like Bitcoin is a giant red flashing light, because we recognize that this is, the $35 trillion in debt. We can't keep going down this path, and it really impoverishes the majority of the nation, and it leads to some of the division and the populism, the frustration that we see. Why doesn't the credit market understand that this isn't sustainable, and this is really harming the value of the dollar and the working class?
Okay, there's a lot to unpack there, but the reason they don't is that the smartest people in the room that know that this is a problem, they don't have the solution. They haven't embraced Bitcoin. And by the way, as I say, Bitcoin isn't the only solution. I think Michael Saylor agrees that Bitcoin isn't the only solution. He only sees Bitcoin capturing 7% of total financial assets over the next, what was it? I think he ran it for 21 years or something.
21, yeah.
Like, he sees he talks about people still wanting apartments in New York City. And the truth is, there is a potential for the US debt machine to grind to a halt where an auction fails. And then it's like the bug hitting your windshield, right? It's like, oh my, bang. I thought I was in good shape, and all of a sudden it's a calamity. So the people that do know, they don't want to acknowledge that this 35 trillion of debt, Nat, this is so funny because in 5 years, that 35 trillion of debt, just by pure mathematics, is going to be 60 trillion.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
And that will equate to 170% of GDP, US GDP. And as Luke Groman points out, and others, no nation in history that spends more money on their interest expense than their military expenditures, which the US just currently passed, where interest expense on the debt is only going to go higher, and military expending is going to struggle to maintain its current level. No nation that has experienced that in history has not failed. So on the one hand,
where is this in the credit market?
The credit markets are all subordinate to the treasury market. So this is where I say there's enough buyers of the current treasury market that still believe that that is your quintessential risk-free asset. There's enough buyers as long as the US prints money to fill the gap that exists, because you can't possibly have enough buyers for 35 trillion of debt going to 60 trillion. They don't exist. You need a buyer of last resort. Who is that? It's the US Treasury. Okay, it's that simple. And as long as we understand that QE infinity is baked into the math, then you can accept, okay, I'm worried about next year's bonus, and I'm fairly confident between now and next year, this thing is not going to go off the rails. Can I say between now and 20 years from now, where Mr. Saylor is still confident that Bitcoin will exist in parallel with the US dollar? Certainly, I hope that he's right, but I can't see out 20 years like that. And there is a possibility that we get a cataclysmic event. But I trust me when I say, if the USA fails, I wouldn't want to be in pretty much any other country in the world, because the trickle-down effects from the USA failing are going to be just so painful to everybody else in the world. So when I say credit markets, Nat, I tend to talk about credit markets, not US Treasury markets on a refunding basis, on an interest rate basis. You can look at things like credit default swaps.
Right.
What is the credit default swap on the USA right now? And it's hanging in there. It's not anything to be concerned with, but it's also not zero. So is the US Treasury a risk-free asset? Not pure risk-free, but good enough for most of the people out there when they compare US Treasuries to equities, to high-yield debt, to real estate, to the other typical asset classes.
Right.
It'll be quick. And I have a little joke for you. It's like a bug hitting. I've already gone too far to withdraw this. You can edit this out. What's the last thing that goes through a bug's mind when it hits your windshield? And maybe it's gonna be like a bug hitting your windshield. So what's the last thing that goes through a bug's mind when it hits your windshield?
It's too late.
No, it's arsehole. Okay, so think about that, and that's where we might be. All of a sudden, we're sitting there, and our arsehole goes through our brain because we're a bug hitting the windshield. I don't want that to be the case.
Okay, well, I agree with you. I don't want like a cataclysmic deflationary bust or Great Depression 2.0. I really do hope that Bitcoin is a peaceful parallel system we can all opt into. So before we wrap up, I do want to get your take on some of these price predictions that people like Michael Saylor have offered recently. The last time we talked, I thought that I think you said that the current value in fiat dollars of Bitcoin should be like $2 million with your calculation. And then we have a base case 21 years out from Michael of 13 million a coin, I believe. So what do you think about these price predictions?
Well, they're the same.
What will that actually be worth when all of the money's inflated and $100,000 no longer buys you anything?
Bingo. Okay, but my prediction of $2 million in today's dollars is exactly the same as Michael Saylor's prediction of $13 million in 21 years. See, because I just said today's dollars. All he's done is put compound interest for 21 years on $2 million to get to $13 million. Or not him, but that's how the math works, okay?
Yeah.
So compound interest is the eighth wonder of the world. Somebody said that. I don't know who it is, but it is true. It's an exponential growth of your debt because of compound interest. It's too late. It's over. You cannot get out of this debt spiral. It is locked in right now. Someone said, somebody pretty smart, I can't remember who it was, on
I
Twitter
think
said,
it was Albert Einstein, or it's attributed to him. I
oh,
think.
okay. What I saw a Twitter tweet that said, just sell all the land in the USA and deflate the US budget deficit or debt to zero. Sell all the land. Okay. Who's the buyer? Who out there has $35 trillion to buy all the land in the US?
Right.
Nobody.
No, it's
Nobody
like Jeff
has
says,
this.
it's already insolvent. The debt is insolvent.
It is very predictable over the long term. Over the short term, over the next 2 weeks, 2 months, I mean, you have a U.S. federal election. The volatility around that is going to be very interesting.
Right.
I'll leave you with the word stagflation. I hope it's not true, but it's something that very few people have lived with. Just be careful. I want to thank you. I know it's close to an hour and we only had 45 minutes for this. It's so great to see you. I don't know. I don't know the answer, and anyone who thinks they do needs to risk adjust the potential outcomes. We didn't talk about the latest power law and all the things that's brought up. I'd like to say that I look at the output of the power law, and I'm not going to argue with it, but it's one input into the price calculation of where Bitcoin should be. Mm-hmm. My evaluation of Bitcoin using credit default swaps, sovereign debt credit default swaps, wasn't quite 2 million US in today's dollars, but it's still a lot higher than it's currently trading at what is it, 63,000 US dollars per Bitcoin right now. Mm-hmm. I think it's still incredibly cheap, but I've made my mistakes. People will continue to make their mistakes out there. All I can say is, go ahead.
Well, I do want you to share the update you tweeted the other day, right? That you want to be working in the Bitcoin space. You're looking for people who might be hiring. Can you share more about that and maybe what that message is?
Well, thank you. So Bitcoin Magazine reached out to me. Isn't that amazing? Dylan LeClaire reached out to me and said, Foss, I have some ideas for you. So did David Bailey. So I think we're cool. That'll try and put the ordinals crap to bed on that. But I've had some pretty neat opportunities being presented. Nothing of which, I'm gonna accept on the fly. I need to be cognizant of what I can add to a business. I'm 61 years old. I'm going to maintain my dedication to learning forever, to try and learn forever. So I would love to get involved in a situation where I can learn and be part of a future technology that my kids will say, Dad, wow, you screwed up, but you got back on the horse and you aligned yourself with this technology that you've been preaching for 8 years now. So the response has been amazing, Nat. And there's some things that really get me pretty pumped. But what I want to say more than anything is, it's a pretty short, try not to live in such short increments of 1 year and 2 year, and try and extend to where you want to be in the next 10 years and what you can add to that journey. The thing that I will say is even Jason Williams reached out and put me in touch with a pretty cool project that he's involved with. And all of these things are amazing. And I thank these people for reaching out. So, I know that Sam is in a similar situation as I am right now. Sam's about half of my age, or maybe a little more than half my age, but still got way more energy and a lot longer runway to make his impact on the world. So you and him being the crypto couple has already been taken, Carla and Walker, but you guys will be something else, that you'll look back and your kids will look at, say, hey, my mom and dad were pretty cool. And this leaves a story that I'm not sure I've ever told you on your show, but I need to tell the world this story about my family. I don't know if you guys know this, but my family created the first automobile in Canada. Did I ever tell you that?
You shared this on our
Did
first
I?
interview.
Okay.
Yeah, I recommend people. I'll link it. Yeah.
Okay, it's called the Fossmobile. Okay,
Yeah.
you can FOSSMO mobile, and it was in a place called Sherbrooke, Quebec, which is right on the U.S. border, right above Burlington, Vermont, sort of thing. Not a stone's throw, but within 50 miles of Burlington, Vermont, called Sherbrooke, Quebec. And my great uncle produced this Fossmobile, and it was so good that Henry Ford called him up and said, let's go in business together. And my uncle said, nah, these things are never going to catch on.
Wow.
And the reason that he said they weren't going to catch on is because in Sherbrooke, Quebec, in the wintertime, they only shoveled snow off of the sidewalks and put that snow into the streets. And the horses on their sleighs were able to go on the street. But my uncle had to drive his car on the sidewalk because that's where it had been shoveled. So he said, this will never catch on. You have to drive your car on a sidewalk. And the citizens are like, outraged that you're driving a car on the sidewalk. So there was only one Fossmobile ever produced, and we know what Henry Ford did. So maybe I have it in my blood that you got to make a blunder. But my heritage is, I'm pretty proud of that Fossmobile link and everything like that. So.
Well, you should give yourself more credit. I know a lot of people really admire the work that you've done. You've set such a great example for your children as well. You're so passionate for the core reasons why we all love Bitcoin, which is that it is this freedom and economic empowerment technology, and it is so that the kids have a better future. It's just a pleasure to host you and be your friend, Greg. I hope people reach out. I know that this community is one that really wants to give back and help. And that's something that you've always said, right? That Bitcoiners are givers, they're not takers. And so I hope the very best for you. Thank you for taking so much time on the show. And you made me, with what you just said, you made me think of that Rocky Balboa scene where Sylvester Stallone is talking about how when life hits you, it's not about how hard you get hit. It's about how you react to that, how you get back up from falling. And I think there's so much grace in that, and showing that it's not the failure. It's really how you react to it, how you pick yourself back up and persevere. So I know a lot of people look up to you and will be messaging you after this message. So Greg, thank you so much.
Let's end it with a big hug, a virtual hug for you and Sam. I won't be there, but there's a ton of people that I know that are going, and will surround you with all the best wishes for you and Sam and your family. And so that's such an important event. And from my wife, Julie, and I.
Thank you.
Thank you.